Generally speaking, I don't try to clean the brushes when I use them for contact cement. But you certainly could if you wanted to. Okay. I need one more. Maybe one more here real quick. Have some piece of plywood. Typically, when we're working with plywood, we need to cut thin strips, and we use it for edge banding to kind of cover up the plies. We can do that in a variety of ways. You can use solid wood, of course, or we can use veneer. And we're going to try to with a little bit of veneer here, but I do need to put a little more glue in this one. I suggest you put enough glue on so that when the glue is dry, it leaves a shiny surface. If you notice this one, it has a glossy surface to it. That would tell me this is in real good condition for veneering. Notice it has blue tape on it. This one has a crack in it. So we'll do this. I'm going to just set this back around in the vise and pick up my mess. Okay. Now, let's see if we can talk about veneer. Can be really interesting material. It can be lots of colors. It has a rough surface to it, and so, especially burls. Burls can be really gnarly stuff. They're going to need to be softened, and you can buy a softening agent, and all a softening agent does is allow them to become flexible and lay flat. Typically, what you're going to do is take glycerin and mix it with water. If you go on the web, you can find some recipes for glycerin and water and glue and alcohol kind of blended together. The alcohol helps it to dry. Then you lay the veneer, spritz it pretty good, put it between a veneer press, between two sheets of plywood with paper layers between them, then soak the water out of it, and it'll soften up. When it's dry, it's ready to be used. Here's an example of a piece. We're going to send this one around the room. This is a piece where we've done what we're going to try to do here, attempt to do on this larger piece in iron, in everyday ordinary clothes iron. And if you set it on the cotton setting, it'll work pretty good for this process. There are prepared veneers available if you'd like to use them, and they seem to work really well. And I have some veneer over here. I thought I had a piece prepared. We're going to cut one real quick. Cutting veneer is as simple as using a utility knife and a straight edge. I'm going to cut it a little wide. My recommendation is use light strokes, scoring it. When you cut across the grain, if you use too much pressure, the ends have a tendency to tear out and chip out. When you cut with the grain, the knife has a tendency to follow the grain and may not make straight lines. So it's a good idea to use a light stroke. Try to lay your knife down pretty flat so that you have a real soft angle in it. This has been pre-glued. Just roll my pump. Oh, there it is. Maybe I won't pump water today. Plan B. We'll spritz it, lightly dampen it, set it on top of the glue, Our iron is warm, and we'll just put it in place. Check it pretty regular. Move. If you stay in too long a place, you run, especially with light colored woods, you run the risk of scorching the wood. I'm just gonna iron this down. This is a process I use to veneer that box. It works on large pieces, small pieces, pretty easy to do. And we'll sign that on here. We'll let that sit for a minute. I'm going to check it, let it cool, and we'll come back to it. In the process, in the meantime, our contact cement is getting close to be ready. Oh, by the way, while we're doing this, glue drying. This is an example of a piece that's been finished. This is, these two panels were alike. You glue the veneer on, and when you finish it, you've got a pretty nice panel for making doors, panel doors, flat panel doors. This is ideal. In styles for cabinets, all work pretty good. And when you start prying at the edges, it's pretty stable. Pretty stable. Okay, my contact cement here is ready. I better do this one while it's ready. This is a piece of substrate. Once these two stick together, they're permanent. So I'm going to do this kind of carefully here. Cut it slightly oversized. We need some sort of a scraper. They're sometimes called veneer hammers. Veneer hammer usually is metal with a hammer handle on it, typically used with hide glue. You can buy scrapers here in the store, or you can make one. They're usually about a foot long. I like mine a little narrow. And what we need to concern ourselves with is we're going to push the air out. And put a lot of down pressure. J rollers are not recommended because they're usually 1 3/8 in diameter. So the contact area with the veneer is pretty large compared to the scraper. Therefore, you don't transfer as much pressure. It works really good for a laminate, not really good for veneer. So we're going to take it. This is the hard part of veneering. You want to get down here and push pretty hard. It's on, it's attached. We take our utility knife. Cut along the edges. And we have a piece of veneer. Plywood. Questions? Yes?
When you're building a box like that you keep your supplies in, do you normally do some of the construction and then veneer, or do you veneer the panels and then use them to construct the box?
Typically, I build the entire box, veneer it, and take it to the saw and saw it, put the lid off. When I build boxes, I build them solid cubes and then saw the lid off so they fit real good.
So you veneer it after you build the box?
After I build the box. Perfect.
You talked about the contact cement being permanent. With the pressure sensitive, PSA, some of the other glues, the heat activated glues, if you damage sometime later a piece of veneer, can you pull that off? Or?
Heat the iron-on, you can't. That's nothing more than hot melt glue.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, you can take it and reheat it and put it back on. The iron-on glue, or the iron-on veneer, if you should have a piece come loose, just simply spritz it, take your iron to it, and iron it a little bit, and you can re-loosen, re-liquefy the glue. PVA glues do not get set hard. They're always rubber and leathery. Even when they're dry, they're not hard. And so they're easy to recondition and use again. So yes. We'll go back to this, make sure this is down good and tight. Trimming these, I've got this one a little large. Trimming them can be I'll show you how we do that. And the corners, you notice on the box, the corners are not going to be, they don't come up, they're not easy to feel. There's a plan on how you organize your corners, how you overlap your corners. If I use the board here, if that's your corner, and you're going to put veneer over top of it, you want to plane your corners so that that's going to give you the most protection. If most of your rubbing is going to be in this direction, it'll be able to protect this corner pretty good. And then we'll simply round that over just a little bit. And my tool for rounding is a file. I would take a file and rub all the corners on the box with a file. If you want to, an alternative is sanding down, or if you make your own little finger sanders, these work really well also. Nothing more than just taking sandpaper and gluing it to a thin strip of wood. Give you a little more control, a little less grit applied, therefore it doesn't cut quite as fast. Because it's real easy to file through or cut through the corners. And if you do, you've got to do a little bit extra work to put it back on there. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about here. On the paperback veneer. Paperback veneer is thin veneer, wood veneer, real wood, that has a paper backing applied to it. You'll find it comes in two sizes, 10 mil and 20 mil. 10 mil being most likely the most common you're going to use. 20 mil works pretty good for really, really, really rough surfaces. It's got a lot of holes and knots and it's not very smooth. The disadvantage of 10 mil, it will telegraph through. You will see bumps underneath it. It will telegraph through. But it's a fairly pliable material. It's very durable, and I do apply it typically with contact cement. That's fairly common. The tools you're going to, how do you cut this stuff? A couple of ways to cut it. Scissors work real good. You got a heavy pair of scissors, they work really good. The utility knife works excellent. And then if you're so inclined, a veneer saw. The veneer saw is not really a saw. It's kind of a play on words. It's really a knife. And when you buy these, they're dull. They won't cut anything. You got to take the time, take the blade off, and sharpen them. And they have little teeny teeth on them, which are going to be hard to see. So you want to keep the back real flat. When you cut, if you need a square cut where you're going to join two pieces together, most people will tell you need a large straight edge, a known square. And you can run the flat side of your veneer saw right alongside of it here until you get a square cut. With the utility knife, you may get a slight bevel cut. You will not get the best joints. A straight edge, a metal straight edge also works. We'll do one, we'll cut. Here's a couple samples of paperback veneer. Unfinished oak veneer, red oak veneer, and something with a little bit of color on it. And you notice they're pretty flexible. They're pretty easy.
Why would you use paperback versus non-paperback veneer?
Pardon?
Why would you use one of the paper type versus the non-paper type?
Why would you use this as opposed to a leaf of veneer?
Yeah.
It's just quicker and easier. Somebody's already done the task of sealing this all together for you. So all we have to do is merely glue it in place. I did a house where last summer where a lady had a new stairwell put in, and it was white painted trim along the edge of the stairs, and she had the entire house was converted to oak trim. She wanted to have oak put in it, and this is what I used to put a veneer existing painted material. You can't tell it's not real wood when you walk in her house. Very, very well done. Very, very attractive. And it's so durable. You can bend it around almost anything. I believe if I had to, I could put it around a 3/4 inch dowel rod without cracking it. See, I'm pretty small. So there are some advantages to paperback veneer. It's really simple to use. It cuts easy. It's not brittle. So it's easy to work with to make it fit whatever shape you want. And that's a nice feature about it.
So with burl wood, the paperback, you have to soften it? Or?
No, paperback does not have to be softened. It's already been done at the factory for that. And by the way, when they make veneer, it's kind of an interesting process. Typically, the logs are selected and they're put into a big metal tank and they're boiled for hours and hours and hours, sometimes days. Most of the veneer companies won't tell you how much time they boil them because it's a secret. It softens them, and they bring them in, and there's 3 or 4 ways to create veneer. One is to put it between the centers, like on the lathe, and turn it off. That's a rotary cut. Typically, that's used to make plywood, but not the kind of veneer we use. The leaf veneer we use is typically sliced off of a 1/4 of a log. Sometimes the log is held in place and moved across a knife. Sometimes the knife is moved across the log depending upon the company where it's done. Notice this is a sequence matched. This is a kind of an interesting feature about veneer. It is repackaged in the container exactly the way it came off the log. So if you want, for example, book match, you just simply open them up and you get book match. If you want a slip match, you can just lay them side by side and get a slip match. We'll talk more about that in July when we do traditional veneering. We'll spend quite a bit of time with traditional kinds of Fletcher veneer. This stuff is about 328 of an inch thick. That's approximately 46 sheets per inch. So it's pretty thin. And as we showed you earlier, it's easy to break. And so it has to be handled with some degree of care, or else you end up with kindling. Where the paperback is pretty durable with regard to that. Questions? I'll show you cutting this with a utility knife as well. Cuts extremely good, but you have a flat angle, use several scoring cuts. And you get a nice straight cut. Now when you if you want a seam veneer is pretty easily done with masking tape. If you want to put it back together again, I try to pull these apart so you can see the seam on these, but you can put it back together where you can't even see the seam. So it does function quite easily. Questions on paperback veneer? Are we going to do, oops. This one's it's cool, it's dry. I'm going to remove the largest portion here with the utility knife. I make a tool for trimming veneer. I typically don't trim both sides at one time, although you certainly can. And use something run across the edge here, and we can trim the veneer off pretty easy. If I don't, I've got a lot of edge here. If I'm not careful, I'll break it. I'll chip the end of it off. So I'm going to trim a little more off with the utility knife. You can certainly do it with a trim router. Trim router works really good for this also. I think a trim router works really slick on this one. If you press on it wrong, you can break it. I wanted to show you finishing the edges. And there's a piece we just put together. And if you see any loose spots, you just simply put the iron to it and re-go back down again. Let's see, let's do PSA. PSA veneer is sometimes called a peel and stick, pressure sensitive adhesive. Peel and stick veneer is the cabinet refinisher's best friend. It applies best when the surface, it actually will not stick to wood very well at all, regardless of how smooth you sand it. It doesn't stick very good to wood, it's too porous. And so you need to have some sort of a finish on the wood. Typically, when you refinish cabinets, they've been treated with polyurethane, or if they have some sort of a lacquer or finish on them. All you have to do is get it good and clean, and then use a peel and stick and put it on there. And simple piece of plywood. It's been treated with polyurethane. Yep. I'll cut a piece to put on it. This, just like the paper bag, it is paper bag with the adhesive on it. It is very easy to use. I'll get it about the right size. It's pretty easy to cut. Pull the paper off. And by the way, when you veneer, you should veneer both sides of the piece, the front and the back. If you veneer just one side, you run the risk of not getting, of the wood changing shapes. Almost always recommended to do both sides. Again, we're going to use our veneer. It's fairly permanently attached. We'll remove it. Peel and stick veneer is not real friendly to water-based finishes. It seems to work better with oil-based finishes. And I'll send a piece of this stuff around so you can see where it goes. I like it really well for a lot of projects. I think it's easy to use. It's quick. You notice how quick and easy. There's not much prep to it. You end up with a very good piece of finish. This is peel and stick plywood, raw, with a coat of polyurethane on the top of it.
Is there a benefit to using deglossers or so on before you do the?
You want a good clean surface for a smooth surface for it here too. I think a lot of times we see in kitchens, in cabinets, and that refinish where there's a residue on the cabinets you try to remove.
Well, the solid good cleaners do that.
Exactly.
Kitchen cabinets that way.
Exactly.
Deglosser and painted, but you know, if there was a benefit to using deglosser and then maybe letting it really cure completely.
Not that I'm aware of. There probably is, but I'm not aware of it. I do suggest that it will take at least 24 hours for peel and stick adhesive to cure. It requires at least 24 hours. It does not cure. We could take that off right now and reposition it, and it really doesn't hurt the veneer. You can change it quite a bit. But it sure makes things easy, makes a good solid material to work with. There's some fun things you can do with veneer. This is a sample piece. This was merely a little bit of veneer inlay. Simple, a little quick little runner project, and you can do those fun things. Other fun things you can do with veneer. This is 5 sheets of veneer used to make a cake server. This one is layered with, how many cake servers are made out of walnut burl? kind of a special occasion. Here's a form I use, some leaves of veneer, sheets, little chunks of scraps of veneer that have been glued together. And this will be a cake server eventually. This one's going to have some tiger stripe on top. So we're going to try to demonstrate this in July. Questions?
On that last piece, you used like a vacuum press or something to,
Yeah, I did. I used a vacuum press, a piece of countertop, and a piece of heavy plastic. I didn't use a bag. There's a lot of different things you can do with a press. I do a lot of that with my background is mechanics, and I was trained as a tractor mechanic when I was a young man, and diesel mechanic, and I use the same vacuum press I use for air conditioning to do that kind of work. Seems to work pretty good. Questions? Okay. Cutting sheets of veneer can be a little on the intimidating side simply because it's so brittle, but it doesn't have to be that challenging.
the action with a veneer saw, a sawing action, or is it?
It's more of a draw action with a knife.
Just
I'm
like
gonna try to demonstrate that for you. Before I do that, I'll send this around the room. You can look at it. It is sharp. It does have little teeth. It requires a specialty file to recut the teeth. They're kind of hard to find, but you can use them for years and years and years and years and years. Notice there's teeth on two sides. When one side gets dull, you just unscrew it, turn around, and use the teeth on the other side, providing that side of the blade has been sharpened. Glue was drying very slowly today. One of the tricks is to seam things together. We'll send this piece around. You'll be hard pressed to find the seam until you bend it. That's why you want to use the veneer saw. That's why veneer saws are having an advantage over the utility knife when you're cutting. You get a nice straight crisp edge. In July, I'll also show you how to true a stack of veneer so you can make them all so that the edge actually disappears. They butt together real crisp. You need a good straight edge. This happens to be a piece of oak or walnut, a red oak that has been straightened. It's pretty straight, so it's going to give me a good straight edge when I'm ready to cut. The length is about the length of a sheet of veneer that I use, so that's why it is. Make them whatever's comfortable for you. If you look at this one, this one side is slightly different color than the other sides. I've done that intentionally. That's my knife side. And these are square corners. Be very particular about getting square corners. And then I have mine marked so it sets in the drawer. I know exactly what piece to pick up. If we're done with the veneer knife, we'll thank you. Most veneering is cut slightly oversized and then trimmed afterwards. I'm going to, first I'll just cut an edge square. Notice I use a slight rocking motion. And not a lot of down pressure. If we stop partway, you can see we're starting to break it off here. It'll, pretty close, it'll chip off. That's not what you want. You want to cut them pretty square. Straight. The rocking motion allows you to vary the angle slightly, which are on the ends. It's helpful because the ends seem to be pretty tender. Just let my straight edge move. You can get a pretty nice cut that way. Not quite dry enough to put together yet. We'll get there here directly. Got a piece with a cathedral pattern in it. Something you might want to repeat across a project. I'll cut it and we'll seam it. We've cut it at an angle. Pretty easy to put back together so that it's hard to find that seam. Masking. And by the way, you want to pick your face side. There's a face side and a back side. That's going to be my face side. That's the side that shows. So I'm going to put that together with the masking tape on the face side. Flip it over, and we're going to use veneer tape. Veneer tape is kind of a sticky paper tape, pre-glued. It'll have a variety of holes in it or solid. And what's unique about this is we take something damp. I have a paper towel, a damp paper towel in a plastic cup. I'm just going to dampen the glue. And what's neat about this is put it in place and stretch it slightly. Just slightly stretch it across it, and as it dries, it'll shrink and pull the seam tighter together. I'm going to put several of these across here. And then we'll need a longer one to go the whole length.
The veneer tape's thin enough to not telegraph through what you.
Pardon?
Is the veneer tape thin enough that it doesn't telegraph through when you apply the veneer?
The veneer tape will be on the surface side.
Oh, okay.
We want it on the surface side. It'll have to be scraped off when you're done. I'm going to remove the blue tape now, because it will telegraph through. Put it on the inside. Send that around, you can see what this seaming process. You can find it, but you gotta kind of look for it. When it's all done, you probably never see it with a little bit of finish on it. To remove it, after it's been glued in place, and we'll try to glue that one down a little bit so you can see it in action. Usually wet the paper and then take a hand scraper, and it usually comes off pretty quick. You can sand it off, but sanding's kind of risky because of the thick, how thin the veneer is. It's easy to sand through the veneer if you get too aggressive. Paperback veneer comes in rolls. Usually in sort of a paper or plastic tube. It comes in a variety of rolls. You can see on the table over here, we have 2 foot by 8 foot, 1 foot by 8 foot, or 4 by 8 feet rolls of veneer. And it comes, the store here carries it in, generally in paperback, 10mm paperback, and peel and stick, those two, in a variety of species. And if something you don't see that you'd like to have, you need to check with someone at your store that can certainly order it in. We do try to carry most of the domestic varieties and a few exotics. That's pretty easy way to get veneer. I'm going to speed this drying up a little bit. I'd like to demonstrate that. People will tell you that you have to do this iron-on veneer right away. I don't find that to be true. A lot of times I'll leave sheets of veneer set for weeks and weeks and weeks before I use them with no ill effects. Speed things up with quick here, right when you feel it. You can do this at home, but on a large sheet, it's not very practical. Put a piece of veneer to the side. It's dry, it doesn't stick, nothing sticks to it anymore. It's pretty dry again. This one is dry also. Place them. Simply take the iron. Iron it down. It's always it was the edge banding. Same applies here. A suggestion with regard to using it iron out of the house. You run the risk of getting glue on the iron. If your significant other does not like to have glue on the iron, there is an alternative to that. Use a piece of non-stick aluminum foil on the face of the iron and you won't get any issue with it. I'll send this around without trimming it, and you can probably pry the corners up in places. If there's any place that it's prized up, we'll just simply put the iron to it and re-glue it back down again.
I forgot that that's the PDA, that's what you treat it that way?
Correct, that's PPA glue. Yes. You can use a cold press glue, but it just takes longer to cure. There's 3 layers of glue on the substrate, 3 layers of glue on the veneer. Any questions on veneer? You notice how I got that one kind of crooked too.
So you let that glue dry before you put a second coat on, and then you just let it?
Very good for let it dry. Very good for let it dry. Yes. Trim it. You can do the edges. By the time you get done, you'll have a cube that you can identify from a solid block. It's here, except for there's no membrane.
You said sometimes you leave the non-glue part out for several weeks, you put it in a plastic bag or anything?
Mine just lays on the shelf. Might in a dust-free area. Yeah, the plastic bag is probably a good idea if you have a very dusty area to work. This piece was made in August last year. It's dated August 2013. It's still usable. So, not a very nice piece. It's got some kind of stuff on it. Yeah, perfectly usable. I want to show you the curliness in veneer. Veneer has a tendency to curl up real bad. This one's especially nasty. Let's see if we can give it a little bit of a it should unfold. In theory, it will unfold. Some of the stuff is pretty gnarly looking, and you think, well, that'll never be usable, but it really is. Dampness makes them soft enough to work. We'll try to put a couple of these together. I'm going to dampen the glue, dampen the substrate. And the substrate has been glued, by the way. It's done ahead of time.
Which is what?
The substrate has been glued. It has dry glue on it. It's been dried for several days.
Why are you moistening the substrate?
It'll reconstitute the glue. The glue's pretty dry. It's been dried for several days. It's cured.
Okay.
I like to get a little bit of steam and make it the veneer, a little more flexible, and make the glue a little softer.
So if it's not fresh, do you recommend always?
I always spritz them a little bit,
Okay.
just to dampen it a little bit. And notice our curled up piece is starting to become more usable. And this piece, it looked like it was not going to be very flat. It's going to, I think, iron out okay. Now, can't you picture making a table or a nightstand or something out of inexpensive plywood and putting veneer on it? You got these really attractive wood pieces to look at. So it makes it so nice, and that they're so stable. You can glue all the pieces in place. You don't have to worry about it becoming detached. I'm going to trim this one off.
So veneer both sides, is that just when you're using a solid wood substrate, or
Pardon?
to veneer both sides? That's just when you're using a solid wood substrate, or you have to do that with plywood also?
I do with plywood. I do with everything. Both sides.
And you have to use the
I'm not sure you have to on plywood. I think if you put some sort of a sealant finish, you're probably okay, but I've always, and if you're gonna veneer solid wood, I recommend you cross veneer the face side. So that if you have if you're gonna use solid wood and the grain goes this direction, put your cross veneers so the grain goes this direction, and put your finished veneer the direction of the substrate.
You lost it. When you talk finished veneer.
The piece you're gonna see,
Okay.
the piece
So
you're
cross
gonna
grain on the
see. Yeah,
no-show side.
you always cross grain. This is the front, the face. The part you're gonna see should have 2 layers of veneer on it, on solid wood. One that goes across the grain. The grain goes this direction. Here the grain goes up and down. It's gonna help us get some stability underneath for the base for the veneer. And if this is a veneer you see, you put it on this direction. So that you actually get cross grain laminations very similar to plywood.
And do the same thing on the no-show side?
You can put a regular one on the opposite direction on the no-show side and it'll work.
Just a single layer.
Single layer.
Cross grain, or it doesn't?
Yes, cross grain, definitely cross grain. Yes, it'll make it much more stable. Yes, sir.
What about species, when you're laminating 2 sides, if you've got something expensive like the zebra wood here, would you have to use the same species on the other side?
No, they use what they call a scrap veneer. It's whatever's cheap.
Okay.
Typically, they'll do it with birch. It's very common to see it. In fact, if you look inside of a cabinet, sometimes you'll think it's made with birch veneer plywood, and actually it could be solid wood with birch.
But for the show side, those two have to be the same.
They don't have to be. You can use the cheap veneer for the cross grain and the face veneer. They don't have to be exactly alike.
There'll be no expansion.
You should have no problem with that. You should have no problem. Because the wood doesn't expand very long in the direction of the grain, only across the grain. So,
Do you have to use 2 layers in on the edges or just on the
no,
face?
you do not. The 1 layer on the edges is all you need. got some sticky on it. Put two of them together. No, I don't think I have to use this one over here. Yeah, we'll put that one on there. You know I'm left-handed. Tools are made right-handed. And you will sometimes
I would use 3 layers of glue again, glue that final with the grain piece.
if I'm going to use iron-on glue, I do. Yes, I do. Again, I repeat, a lot of the websites and a lot of the books you read do not demand 3 layers of glue, but if it's not shiny, you run the risk of not having thick enough glue to match the surface. If your surface is perfectly flat, it shouldn't be a problem, but if there's any inconsistency in your surface, then you may not have enough glue to get a good complete seal.
So you're kind of using the glue as a filler, kind of go in
Yeah.
the grain.
Exactly. Exactly. I don't want this to move while I'm doing it. So we just put a piece of tape on it to hold it in place. I find veneering to be fun, it's challenging, it does require a degree of patience. It has very few quirks in its personality, it's easy to work with. Okay, I think we're okay. There's an example of putting 2 different species together with very low issue, short period of time.
On that piece there, you didn't do the cross grain, separate pieces to pull it tight.
No, I didn't think I need to, I had a pretty good fit.
Okay.
Had a pretty good fit. Believe it or not, I did a little bit of prep work. So I thought I had some pretty straight edges.
That veneer tape, the piece is only on one side.
Only on one side, correct. I did not bring my card scraper today. I think you can see what we're looking at. Questions?
We're doing a whole tabletop, how long or more of a sheet? Even if you could lay a whole sheet at one time across the entire surface, would you do that?
Yes, I would. I would.
The biggest.
If I was to use a paper bag veneer to do a tabletop, I would, if it was, let's say, a 42 by 46 inch table or 42 by 7.5 foot table, I just buy a big sheet and glue it on.
The whole sheet.
Whole sheet on, trim it, and then take the router, that little plaque that went around with the inlay on it, that was laid up and then laid on the router table and had the edges treated with the router, and you get a nice, clean, crisp edge out.
How about cutting circles?
Very easy,
Like a circle coffee table, a circle.
very easy to do, very easy to do. Yeah, you can cut your veneer to get pretty close to the circle and take it. If you're going to have a thick enough substrate, you can take a trim router with a flush trim bit, dance right around that edge or any edge trimming detail you like. Very easy to do. The only thing that I would say would be a challenge to do, and that is to put peel and stick veneer over raised panel doors. That's challenging in the corners. The flats aren't hard, it's the corners that are hard because you have to make a cut. And that seam is hard to hide. With my skill set, it's hard to hide. You guys probably do a piece of cake, but for me, it's a challenge. You need your three corners perfect, you make a mistake on the last one, bang, you start over again. But you can take it off and start over again, it's not an issue, you can do that. Can we pass this stuff around so you can see this, what it looks like? You can peel some, but I don't feel how sticky it is underneath. This, the self-made, the glue-on is pretty straightforward to use.
If you soften your own veneer, what should the months before you use it?
Mhm.
Is there any way
Yeah,
you can store it?
I saw mine in which, I'm a real moody person. If I get in the mood to saw veneer, I saw veneer. I may saw veneer for a day and a half.
A way to put the glue on it?
If I feel like if I'm doing a project, I glue up quite a bit of it, so I'll have some extra, and I just save it in the cabinet, and when I'm ready to use it, I use it. Pretty easy to do. It's not real hard to have quite a bit saved up ahead.
You don't even let it activate or anything else like that?
This stuff you do. This stuff you do. If you're going to use this stuff, you want to unroll it, lay it upside down, get it as flat as possible, leave it lay there for as many as 2 or 3 days before, so it lays nice and flat. If it's curly, like this one is, we'll take this one out of the bag here. When we talk about this, that's unusable in my opinion. I wouldn't try to put that attach this to anything. It needs to lay on a table. You have to put some weight on it to get it nice and flat, and then start to work with it. Sometimes you have to plan 2 or 3 days ahead for that. This stuff is really nasty if it's, the peel is thicker, it's worse if it's rolled up. If it doesn't look like flat, you increase the chance of having little corners that don't attach themselves, adhere correctly to the substrate. And that might be okay today, it might be okay next month or next year, but 10, 20 years down the road, when these projects are passed on as heirlooms to your family or somebody else's family, that's when the veneer starts to lift. And that's when you have problems. Repairing veneer is fairly easy. It's not that difficult. Most of the old, especially the old stuff is really easy to put together with high glue. And high glue, what we have to do is put a little bit of heat to it. Any kind of heat, you can use a heat gun, an iron, and it'll soften right up. You just lift it right off. If it's a really old piece, it's been in a damp location, very typically the glue has, the adhesive is dried out. You just take a putty knife, you start prying it up, and it'll just all come right off. And you can simply sand it smooth, put new high glue on it, or contacts in there, and reattach your veneer. Pretty easy to do. I think the hardest part about repairing veneer is to get it to find it so the grain matches. You notice I got a lot of little teeny pieces in my pile over here. That's because I save them because they might be a good batch for some unique piece. Any other questions?
You said that you can't really use water-based and peel and stick here.
Water-based finish does not respond well for peel and stick veneer.
How about if you had like a shellac sealer or
Perfect. You hit the nail on the head. You need to have some sort of a petroleum-based product first, and then you can put whatever you like over top of it. And because it's wood, and because the moisture has a tendency to, as we all know, it raises the grain. We watch it soak into the wood real quick and easier in front of us. It has a tendency to respond poorly to the finish, to the adhesive. It just don't seem to work very well together. This is the hardest part about veneering, is putting this back in the bag by yourself. We'll do that here. Any questions? You know, if this one did almost completely straighten out. You probably will in just a minute.
You cannot apply that liquid there on the paperback veneer.
Not needed.
Like we have it curled up like that.
No, it's not needed. It'll relax. Just give it time. It'll relax. It'll require. The nasty stuff are these burls. They're the ones that are nasty. And it's because of the way a burl forms. They're incredibly unorganized cells, and they have a tendency to have a lot of internal stress. And so when you slice them really thin, the stress tries to find a level of equilibrium, and they have a tendency to buckle and change and move quite a bit. And so we don't have a very smooth surface. And that makes it really hard because it's thin, it's dry. If it happens to be warm, like let's say here, where you have a very low humidity, this stuff is going to crack real easy when you try to iron it in place. So you need, or when you try to press it in place, that's where you need to have a softener. Even this stuff is pretty brittle. And we can, I'm being very serious. You can take this, soften it. You want to change the paper on your press probably twice a day. I recommend newsprint. You don't want to use newspaper because the ink in the paper will stain your veneer. So you want a paper bag works, craft paper works pretty good. And typically what I do, I use a large chunk of wood. I have a couple of chunks of plywood, 3/4 plywood that I use expressly for pressing veneer. I put a piece of craft paper down, veneer, I spritz it. I put another piece of craft paper on top. I put 4 or 5 layers of newspaper, another layer of craft paper. I put veneer, spritz it with a softener, and just build up a layer so I have enough veneer to do whatever project I'm going to do. And I put it in the press. I put a bunch of clamps around it. And usually twice a day I'll go through and change the paper, the clear paper, craft paper, only because you don't need mold to generate. If you're really careful and spritz it, you can do it once a day. If you get too much moisture, you open the avenue for mold to form. Nobody wants mold in their wood projects. And once it's dry, you can take this stuff and wrap it around 3/4 inch towels or 1/2 inch towels or legs. You can really get some neat things with it. It's that soft and pliable. With the grain. I don't think you can do it this way. I've never tried it that way. So,
And slicing your own veneer to maximum thickness.
that's 16th inch. I think I can go thinner than this. This is stringing. I make my own stringing for inlay work. Kind of what we do some weird things in our lives. I do a lot of weird things. I'm a kind of a saver, and I needed a project when I wasn't doing anything one weekend, so I used to do quite a bit of house repair. I have a bunch of scrap, throwaway wood. I don't throw much wood away. I'm kind of a tightwad in that department. And so this is old floor base that I put to the thickness planer and created a kind of a square piece of wood. And this is a no mortise picture frame. So I put a picture frame together and put another piece on the back side so that the seams overlap. We got a half lap impact. And I put the inside one a 1/2 inch thinner than the outside to create a recess for the picture frame, or create a picture frame. Yeah, this is just one of those fun projects you play with. And then I decided, okay, I can make a picture frame. You make any size you like. Then I thought I could inlay them. And so I've taken the saw and cut stripes on here. And if I go through this pile of stuff, I should have some inlay that I can glue in here and have inlay. That's something we'll try to do, get a different seminar if somebody's interested, is inlaying and that kind of stuff. I'll send this around, you can see it. This is pretty brittle, it's in the raw. It's just, this is a butt joint glued together, so it's not very strong. And, but that's, and this is just bandsawed veneer. You can make your own veneer, but it requires a specialty blade, one with no teeth. Bandsaws are the best for making veneer, in my opinion, although I do know people that make it with a table saw. The bandsaw blades are real expensive because they got all the set round off of them. They're real flat. And some of them get kind of pricey, but you can make 32nd inch veneer. So it's good. Some people like to do things that are made, for example, from a family heirloom or a tree that a grandparent or somebody planted, or a great grandparent. That's, you can do some of that stuff yourself. The tools are not real expensive. Probably the most recommended tool for applying glue is a braidler. A lot of people like these. I still do brushes. Some sort of a shear is nice to have. Or scissors ruler. This is a really good scraper for putting veneer down. Something about that size, maybe a little longer would be better. This is a commercial scraper. And note the only difference is the commercial one's quite a bit wider. That's a big difference. These have sharp edges on them. The recommendation is to take a piece of sandpaper and put a radius on that And then you can scrape with the grain and use as much down pressure as you can. The more down pressure, the better. You get a much, much better adhesion. Pre-glued edging is another kind of a neat product available. It is hot melt glue. There's several ways you can apply it. The iron does work pretty good for that. Let's see, other tools here. The edge trimmer is nice. It really is a nice tool. And you can squeeze this together and zip that along the edge of. You won't do 3/8 plywood. Yeah. You don't do 3/4 plywood, no trouble. I'll send it around. Be careful, the springs fall out pretty easy. They're not very expensive. The knives are replaceable in them. Glue spreading can be done with a paddle. It doesn't have to be a brush, doesn't have to be a roller. If I do large pieces, if I'm doing like a half sheet of plywood or a full sheet of plywood, I would typically use a paint roller. Dump the glue out, paint roll it on, get a nice even uniform coat.
What kind of that?
Shortest I can get. I got a really short nap. And the wood itself does not have to be smooth. It's best if it is. If it's not smooth, I suggest you fill the holes. A couple ways to fill the holes, a couple suggestions are drywall mud. Probably one of the cheapest and easiest. Wood filler is another good one. And if you get lots of ventilation and something's going to take a lot of rough use, you can use auto body, putty, Bondo. That works really good too. I've had experience with all three of them now. Seem to work real good. Any questions?
Got a really old bed, walnut veneer, with a chunk on just that big, next to an edge. You just try to cut section out, or
If I was to do that, I would take a piece of veneer that's going to match the grain as closely as you can, quite a bit larger than the patch itself, and then I would tape them together, and I would use the utility knife to cut out my patch and cut the veneer on the bed itself, so they have an exact fit, and then remove the old veneer with a putty knife and iron, and then put the glue new one in. And hide glue, if you want to use hide glue, comes in two forms. Hide glue is either in the liquid form, which is the most popular, that's very modern, but originally it came as a dry powder, and you can buy the dry powder kind and make your own. Typically, it is in a heated pot. It's got to be warmed up to be used, the dry powder. I suggest, with all the products I use, I suggest, this one very good, water that has no minerals in it.
still water.
Distilled water, thank you. I suggest distilled water for anything, especially these light colored woods, because if you get a mineral stain in them, that may or may not have an impact on your project. And so, yeah, I would suggest use distilled water, put it in your pot, stir it. When it gets nice and warm, you're ready to go. And if you're going to use hide glue, this is going to sound contrary to, but you glue both sides, top and bottom. Take your veneer hammer and you scrape the top glue off in the process of applying it. It serves as as a lubricant. And then you can sand it and finish it. Veneering, the whole world of veneering, from the 1900s through, well, actually from the 1700s through World War II, was a sign of very, very, very high quality furniture. It was only the elite could afford it because it was so time consuming. But during World War II, obviously there was a lack of manpower and a lack of material, and the quality of veneering took a deep nosedive, become very low quality. In the 60s, 70s, even in the 80s, we started seeing what we call particle board furniture, and the quality got even lower. And so some people, there's a whole generation of people that view veneering as low quality furniture. But in real life, if you want good quality furniture, if the substrate's good material, veneering will last a lifetime. The bed that you're describing that needs real repair work, it's probably an antique. It's probably been around for a while.
18 something.
Yeah, 100 years, over 100 years old. So, I mean, that's speaks pretty highly of it right there. 100 years later, it needs to repair work. How much stuff we build today that's probably everything we build, right?
What was poor in the quality, just the overall thickness, staying the same? Or?
The glue quality changed. Today, glues are phenomenally much better than they were, or geometrically better than they were back that time. And the quality of materials available. There just wasn't any good. And then the quality of the labor. There were very few during from World War II up into about the 80s. There was a whole 2 generations where there were no really skilled veneer, a small percent of skilled veneer people creating furniture. We went from individual produced furniture to mass produced, factory produced, and the machines were unable to match the workmanship that humans could. They could look at this and they glue it down, but they didn't take the time to take their finger and run along the edge and make sure every little corner was down like we do. And then that had a big impact on the quality of the air. And of course, the substrate underneath of it, this product, chipboard, particle board, was not nearly as, because the glues weren't as good, it wasn't as good a product as it is today. Yes, sir.
Question on like curved front antique furniture where you have a drawer front that's been curved. What would you?
Soften the veneer, and you won't have any trouble applying it. I veneer round posts this size with this kind of veneer with a real high degree of success that are used. What's the name of those tables that have the big fat legs on them? I've veneered several of those legs. If you put the seam on the inside, you can't even tell it's veneered leg. Try to pick straight grain veneer, real attractive pieces. Really nice pieces. Any other questions I can answer? Hope you try veneering.
What's the class you talked about in September or the seminar? What is?
We're going to do traditional veneering in July, middle of July, where we'll take leaf veneer and use a vacuum press and use some products with traditional kinds of veneer. Today was going to try to focus on the paper bag, peel and stick, and then the homemade stuff. I think these are really easy. They're something that it doesn't require a real high skill set to be really successful with and build some confidence. And once you build a little confidence, then you're really you might be willing to try a little more complex and more complicated veneering task. I sat down with administration here, we really have 4 veneering seminars. And as I mentioned, I do some inlay work. One of them will deal with inlay, stringing, some of that fancy stuff that you might like to try. We even take a square table leg and take a scratch tool and run a couple of lines up and down the side of it and cut some of this stuff off and glue it in there and take your scraper and scrape it down. Oh my goodness, does it just makes a piece really shine. You can take a student's desk, a graduation desk, or a toy box, or a jewelry box, and put a little bit of inlay around that thing. Man, you really get some compliments. And it's not, I don't think I'm that terribly skilled. It's not that hard to do. Patience and time. We can take a veneer, and we can take this, it's pretty white. And take this veneer and take out, I've got a small cast iron skillet that I put on a hot plate with a little bit of sand in it. And I put the edges of this in there, and it'll turn brown. And you take these little brown shapes and you make little scallops. For example, one of the things I have planned to do is put little fans in the corners of this. Inlay some fans. It's pretty easy to do. It's kind of fun. It may take Sunday afternoon to do it, but it's still kind of fun. So, and you get some things that are really unique. Stuff that not everybody else is creating. So, any questions? I appreciate your attendance. Very much appreciate it.